The shadow between the light and us. Let us imagine for a moment that we do not know the word eclipse. Let us imagine only a human being standing on Earth. In front of that person is the sun. The sun does nothing. It does not fight. It does not protect itself. It does not try to prove its existence. It simply shines. And then the moon moves between the human being and the sun. For a moment, a shadow appears. And this is where a very deep pattern begins to emerge. A shadow does not exist because the light has stopped existing. A shadow exists because something has moved between the light and the observer. This is an incredibly powerful image for human consciousness as well. A person may say, I do not feel love, but perhaps love has not disappeared. Perhaps fear has moved between the person and their ability to perceive it. A person may say, I have no peace, but perhaps peace has not disappeared. Perhaps a thought has moved between the person and peace. A person may say, life is against me, but perhaps life is not against them. Perhaps there is a certain filter of consciousness standing between them and life. And this is where an eclipse becomes a beautiful archetypal image. The moon does not defeat the sun. It cannot extinguish it. It cannot damage it. It cannot take its light away. It can only, for a certain amount of time, change our direct relationship with it. And in the language of consciousness, we could translate this into a simple idea. What covers your light does not necessarily have to be powerful enough to destroy it. It only has to move between you and the source. This, I believe, is one of the great patterns of human psychology. We often fight against our own shadow as if the shadow were our enemy, but the shadow itself has no light of its own and no independent power. It is a relationship between light and an obstacle. And that is why we can look at an eclipse in a completely different way. If we use the language of Golden Bridge consciousness, we can imagine three fundamental principles. The sun as source, consciousness, and light. The moon as reflection, the inner world, and the psyche. And the earth as experience, life, and the human being. Under normal circumstances, we can symbolically perceive the movement of light as the sun, the moon, and the earth. The moon receives light and reflects it, but during an eclipse, a shadow moves between the source and our experience. The sun, the moon, the shadow, and the earth. And suddenly a very deep principle appears. What stands between the source and our experience can determine how much light we are able to perceive. Not how much light exists, how much of it we perceive. That is an enormous difference. And here we can also understand the principle of amplitude that we have spoken about before. If consciousness functions as a feedback system, our inner state can amplify the way we interpret reality. When a person is open, a small stimulus can create a great feeling of beauty. When a person is afraid, a small stimulus can create a great feeling of danger. When a person is in love, a small signal can receive enormous meaning. When a person is in pain, a small signal can be experienced as an enormous threat. An eclipse is, in this sense, a very unusual natural experiment. For a brief period of time, it changes the conditions in which the brain interprets the world. The light changes, the shadows change, the temperature can change, the movement of the air can change, the sky looks different, the sounds and behavior of some animals can change, and the human being receives a very powerful signal. Something is happening, and consciousness begins to observe. Perhaps this is where an even deeper meaning can be found. An eclipse is a natural event that causes enormous numbers of conscious beings to stop their automatic routine and look. Not because the sun necessarily has to be sending some kind of psychic energy, but because human attention becomes synchronized around one phenomenon. Millions of people look upward at the same time, and that by itself is fascinating. On an ordinary day, a person looks at the world and usually does not experience it as an event. The sun is shining. The air is there, the trees are there, the birds are flying, people are walking. The brain filters all of this into the background of normal life. But an eclipse interrupts normality. And when normality is interrupted, attention awakens. The human being begins to observe. And perhaps this is one of the deepest energetic meanings, if we choose to use the word energy. An eclipse creates a space in which a person temporarily stops simply looking forward and begins to look upward. And when attention becomes still, we may begin to perceive things that we normally overlook in the automatic rhythm of everyday life. Perhaps this is why a person can suddenly feel that the air is different during an eclipse. Perhaps they notice a strange quality of light. Perhaps they notice changes in the shadows. Perhaps they sense a subtle change in the atmosphere. Physically, these perceptions can be explained through changes in light, temperature, wind, humidity, atmospheric conditions, and the increased attention of our nervous system. But at the same time, we can use this physical experience as a doorway into inner observation because the eclipse shows us something that happens within consciousness every single day. We do not always see reality exactly as it is. We see it through filters, through experiences, through fear, through desires, through beliefs, through memories, through expectations, through the stories we have created about ourselves and about the world. And sometimes we believe that the filter itself is reality. The eclipse shows us the difference between the light and our perception of the light. The sun can continue shining even when, from the earth, we cannot see it in its full intensity. And in a similar way, something deeper within a human being can still exist even when we are temporarily unable to feel it. Here we arrive at the word shadow. If we translated the eclipse into the language of Golden Bridge consciousness, we could say, the shadow is not the opposite of light. The shadow is evidence that light exists and that something is standing between the light and you, filtering it. And this changes the entire meaning of the word shadow. The shadow does not necessarily mean evil. The shadow can be information. It shows us where something is standing, what is blocking, what is filtering, where we are not seeing the whole picture, where we have identified ourselves with a particular story, where we mistake our filter for reality. And therefore, the shadow can paradoxically become a teacher of light. It can show us what stands between us and what we want to see. And now we arrive at perhaps the greatest paradox of the entire eclipse. During an eclipse, a person may say the sun has disappeared. But when we look at the same event from a cosmic perspective, the sun has never disappeared. It never stopped shining. It was there the entire time. Only the geometry changed. The relationship between the sun, the moon, the earth, and the observer changed. And now let us bring this image into consciousness. During life, a person may say, I have lost myself. I have lost love. I have lost meaning. I have lost connection. But what if in certain moments, the source itself has not disappeared? What if only the geometry between the human being and what they are seeking has changed? That is, I believe, an incredibly powerful model. Not everything that disappears from your perception has disappeared from reality. Sometimes you do not need to create the light again. You only need to remove what has moved between you and the light. And then another beautiful thing happens. The moon continues moving. The shadow moves. The light returns. But the sun did not have to return. The sun was there the entire time. What returned was our direct perception of its light. And perhaps this is one of the deepest lessons of an eclipse. Sometimes we believe that we have to find the light again, but perhaps we never lost it. Perhaps we simply lost our ability to see it for a while, and when the shadow moves away, we do not discover that the light has been created again. We discover that it was there all along. We can also look at the moon from this perspective. The moon does not have to be the enemy of the sun. It can be part of a greater cosmic movement that allows us to experience something we would not normally experience. Without the shadow, perhaps we would not recognize the intensity of the light. Without interruption, perhaps we would not pay attention to connection. Without moments when something becomes invisible, we sometimes fail to recognize the value of what we previously considered ordinary, and therefore, perhaps we do not need to hate our shadow. We can look at it. We can observe it. We can ask what it is showing us, what is between us and the light. Which thought, which fear, which belief, which memory, which story about ourselves, which identity, and perhaps the most important question of all, what if the light never left? What if we simply forgot that it was there? Animals can show us another layer of this experience. They do not have our cultural explanation. They do not know that an astronomical eclipse is taking place. They simply register a change in their environment. For some species, the sudden darkness can resemble a transition into evening or nighttime. Some birds may change their activity, and other animals may respond to the changing light conditions. Symbolically, this is a beautiful image. Animals do not need to know what has happened in order to respond to a change in their environment. Human beings sometimes have the opposite problem. We know what has happened, but we forget to feel that something has happened. And perhaps that is why an eclipse can become an invitation back into direct observation, not into fear, not into imagination, not into the need to immediately explain everything, but into consciousness, to look, to feel, to be present, to allow the moment to exist without immediately forcing it to have a meaning. And perhaps then the meaning appears by itself. Because an eclipse does not have to tell us that darkness is winning. Quite the opposite. It can show us that darkness never had to defeat the light. It only had to pass between us and the light for a moment. And when the shadow moves on, the light is still there. This may be one of the most beautiful metaphors for human consciousness. We are not always without light. Sometimes we are simply in the shadow, and those two things are not the same. When a person understands this difference, their entire relationship with their own shadow can begin to change. They stop being afraid of it. They stop fighting it. They begin to observe it. And when they begin observing it without judgment, they can start to understand what created it, what stands between them and the light. And perhaps that is the moment when the real bridge begins. Not a bridge between light and darkness, but a bridge between what we see and what we have not yet realized. A bridge between our experience and our consciousness. A bridge between the human being and the source. And perhaps this is why Golden Bridge consciousness looks at these natural events in a slightly different way. Not because we need to assign a supernatural meaning to every phenomenon, but because through what is happening outside us, we can learn to look within. The sun can remind us of light. The moon can remind us of reflection. The shadow can remind us of filters. The earth can remind us of experience. And the human being standing between them can pause for a moment and observe. And perhaps in that observation, realize something simple but incredibly profound. Light does not need to prove that it exists. Light simply is. And when we cannot see it, perhaps it is not time to search for new light. Perhaps it is time to look at what stands between us and the light that has been there all along. And when the shadow moves away, perhaps we will not discover that the light has returned. We will discover that it never left.